The Battle of Marathon, a turning point in Western civilization. The messenger Phidippides collapsed on the steps of Athens' Acropolis, his final breath carrying two words that would echo through millennia: "We won." On the plains of Marathon, just hours earlier, 10,000 citizen soldiers of democracy had achieved the impossible, crushing a Persian invasion force of over 100,000 professional warriors. The victory would alter the course of human civilization, but its outcome hinged on a single audacious decision made by an Athenian general named Miltiades, ordering his heavily outnumbered hoplites to charge straight into the teeth of Persian arrows at a full run, something no Greek army had ever dared attempt. The Battle of Marathon wasn't just another clash of armies. It was democracy's first great test against tyranny, innovative military tactics against overwhelming numbers, and Greek determination against Persian imperial might. How these vastly outnumbered Athenians managed to rout King Darius's elite forces would become one of history's most fascinating tales of tactical brilliance, physical courage, and the power of free men fighting for their homeland. This is the story of how a single battle on a beach near Athens changed the destiny of Western civilization. Two worlds collide, Persia and Athens on the brink of war. The golden halls of Persepolis echoed with Darius the Finn's footsteps as he studied the ornate map before him. The greatest empire the world had ever seen stretched from the Indus River to the edges of Greece, encompassing 23 different peoples and 40% of the world's population. Yet there, at the empire's western frontier, a handful of troublesome Greek city-states dared to resist Persian dominion. The great king's advisors had dismissed these Greeks as disorganized rabble squabbling merchants and farmers playing at self-governance through their naive experiment called democracy. But Darius knew better. The Ionian Revolt had proven these Greeks weren't to be underestimated. When his forces crushed the rebellion in 494 BCE, the Athenians' brazen decision to send ships and troops to aid their fellow Greeks had caught his attention. Though the revolt was ultimately crushed, Athens' interference had delayed his armies and cost Persian lives. More troubling still was the message it sent. These Greeks believed they could challenge Persian power and survive. Every night as he dined beneath the carved reliefs depicting tributes from countless conquered nations, Darius would ask his attendant to remind him, "Master, remember the Athenians." In Athens, the winds of change were blowing through the agora. Just 2 decades earlier, the Athenians had overthrown their tyrant and established something unprecedented: rule by the demos, the common people. The city hummed with debate and commerce as citizens from all walks of life participated in their radical experiment of self-governance. In the assembly, even potters and stonemasons could stand and speak their minds alongside aristocrats. This democracy was raw, untested, and often chaotic, but it had unleashed an explosion of creative energy that transformed Athens into a rising Mediterranean power. Then came the news that would freeze Athenian blood. Persian warships had been spotted off the coast of Naxos, and they were heading west. The empire that had swallowed Babylon, Egypt, and Ionia was coming for Greece. As word spread through Athens' streets, citizens gathered in stunned clusters, whispering about the fate of other cities that had defied Persia. The choice was stark: submit to Persian rule and lose their hard-won democracy, or face annihilation by the greatest military force on earth. In the assembly, a young general named Miltiades rose to speak. Having served in the Persian army years before, he alone truly understood what they faced and how they might survive it. While Athens debated, Persian ships were already cutting through the Aegean waves. The veteran commander Datis led a force so massive it took 600 triremes to transport them. Among his troops were the empire's elite, the immortals with their gold-decorated spears, Sakai horsemen who could shoot arrows at full gallop, and battle-hardened infantry from across Asia. To these professional warriors, the coming battle was merely another step in Persia's inevitable expansion. None of them imagined that on a beach called Marathon, they would soon face an army unlike any they had encountered before, and that the world would never be the same. The Gathering Storm. Athens faces Persia. The summer of 490 BCE dawned hot and restless along the Aegean coast. Persian Admiral Datis stood at his flagship's prow, watching his vast armada darken the horizon. 600 triremes sliced through the waves, their bronze-sheathed rams gleaming in the morning sun. Each ship carried hoplites, archers, and cavalry from the farthest reaches of the empire. Syrians with their curved swords, Bactrians in their tiger-skin cloaks, and the fearsome Saka horsemen whose arrows never missed their mark. The fleet's size alone sent a clear message: Persia wasn't coming to negotiate. In Athens' Agora, the assembly erupted into chaos at the news of Persia's approach. The city's best hope, Sparta's legendary army, lay tantalizingly out of reach. Their warrior priests had declared that religious law forbade marching until the full moon, still days away. A faction of aristocrats secretly sympathetic to Persia whispered that surrender was the only option. But Miltiades, his face weathered from years commanding in Thrace, cut through the panic with steel in his voice. Standing before his fellow strategoi, generals, he laid out a plan so audacious it bordered on madness. They would march out to meet the Persians with what they had, 10,000 citizen soldiers against an army 10 times their size. The decision fell to Callimachus, the polemarch who held the deciding vote among Athens' 10 generals. History has preserved the words Miltiades used to sway him. In your hands, Callimachus, lies the future of Athens, to be the greatest of Greek cities, or to be enslaved to the barbarian. Vote with me, and our homeland will be free. As the assembly held its breath, Callimachus stood. His voice rang clear across the Pnyx: I vote for freedom. Within hours, the streets of Athens echoed with the sound of men preparing for war. Bronze armor passed down through generations was strapped on, spears were checked for straight shafts, and shields were buffed to a gleam. Every able-bodied citizen between 20 and 50 joined the march, potters, sculptors, farmers, and merchants forming into their tribal battalions. They were joined by 700 Plataeans, Athens' only allies brave enough to answer the call. The night before departure, thousands of families gathered for what might be their final meals together. Wives and mothers pressed dried figs and barley cakes into soldiers' hands, while children watched wide-eyed as their fathers donned the full panoply of war. Dawn found the army winding its way north along the coastal road to Marathon. The men marched in silence, each lost in his thoughts. They all knew what waited at their destination, the finest professional army in the world, backed by the resources of an empire stretching from India to Egypt. But these Athenians carried something the Persians couldn't comprehend. They marched not as subjects of a king, but as free citizens defending their own land and their revolutionary idea of democracy. As they crested the final ridge overlooking Marathon's plain, the sight below stopped them cold. Persian campfires stretched as far as the eye could see, and hundreds of ships lined the shore like black beads on a string. The moment of truth had arrived. The Battle of Marathon, a prelude to heroism. The morning mists rolled off Marathon's bay, revealing a crescent beach nearly 6 miles long, caught between azure waters and pine-covered hills. Nature had created a perfect military arena, and now 2 armies faced each other across its expanse. The Persians had claimed the northern end, their camp a city of silk tents and horse pickets stretching along the shore. Their ships, drawn up on the beach in neat rows, provided a constant reminder of their overwhelming numbers and their link to the empire's endless resources. The Greeks took position at the southern end, occupying the exit of the Vrana Valley where an ancient shrine to Hercules stood sentinel. From this elevated ground, Miltiades and his fellow generals could survey the entire battleground. The plain before them was mostly level, though crossed with small streams that could break up cavalry charges. Most crucially, the terrain narrowed at both ends of the beach. If the Greeks could hold these choke points, the Persians couldn't bring their full numbers to bear. For 5 days, neither army moved. The Persians, following their tactical doctrine, waited for the Greeks to break formation and attack. Their archers, the backbone of Persian military might, needed disorganized enemies to be effective. But the Greeks held firm, though the waiting gnawed at their nerves. Each dawn, men scanned the southern horizon, hoping to see Spartan reinforcements approaching. Each sunset brought only disappointment and whispered calculations of how long they could maintain their position. On the 6th day, Miltiades called his fellow generals to the shrine of Hercules. Persian cavalry had been spotted boarding ships, clear signs that Datis was planning to split his force, possibly to strike at undefended Athens. The Greek commanders huddled in the pre-dawn darkness, debating their options. The aristocrat Aristides spoke for several when he argued for maintaining their defensive position. But Miltiades, his voice tight with urgency, laid out a different vision. The Persians had grown overconfident, their formation growing sloppier each day. Their cavalry, their greatest advantage on open ground, was temporarily absent. "Tomorrow," he declared, "we attack." That night, orders passed quietly through the Greek camp. The tribal battalions would form up before sunrise. The formation would be unlike anything attempted before. The center would be only 4 ranks deep instead of the traditional 8, while the wings would be reinforced to a depth of 8 or more. Some veterans muttered that such a thin center would never hold, but Miltiades had seen how Persian armies fought. He was betting everything on one crucial insight. The Persians always attacked the center, always pursued a fleeing enemy, and always underestimated Greek discipline. As the men settled in for what might be their final night, many left small offerings at Hercules' shrine. They would need the legendary hero's courage for what was to come. The revolutionary formation. Dawn light glinted off 10,000 bronze breastplates as the Greek army assembled in complete silence. Every man knew his position from countless drills in Athens' training grounds, but this formation was different. The tribal units arranged themselves with mathematical precision, the best troops positioned on the wings, while the center thinned to an unprecedented degree. When Callimachus took his position on the right wing, murmurs rippled through the ranks. Tradition dictated the commanding general stand in the center, yet here was their pole march anchoring the flank like a common soldier. What the Persian scouts reported back to Datis must have seemed like a gift from their god Ahura Mazda. The Greek center appeared weak, undermanned, almost begging to be shattered. The Persian commander deployed his forces in textbook response. Elite Persian and Saka warriors in the center, with lighter troops and conscripts on the wings. Their archers moved forward, ready to soften up the Greeks with clouds of arrows. The morning air grew thick with tension as both armies completed their preparations. Then Miltiades did something unprecedented in the history of Greek warfare. Rather than advance at the standard pace behind a wall of shields, he ordered the unthinkable, a full sprint across the killing zone where Persian arrows would be most effective. The phalanx burst forward like a bronze thunderbolt, 8,000 men moving as one. The distance was just over a mile, and every soldier carried 70 pounds of armor and weapons. The Persians watched in disbelief as the Greeks closed the gap at a dead run, their disciplined lines somehow maintaining formation despite the headlong charge. The Greek advance moved too fast for the Persian archers to deliver more than 1 or 2 volleys. Arrows clattered harmlessly off bronze shields as the distance vanished. The sound of 8,000 men charging in bronze armor grew from a rumble to a roar. The Persian center braced for impact, their commander confident that the thin Greek line would shatter against their mass of professional warriors. But Miltiades had understood something profound about hoplite warfare. The sheer momentum of charging men in 60 pounds of bronze armor could generate a devastating impact, far greater than the measured advance of traditional tactics. The Greeks had transformed themselves into a human battering ram, and the trap was about to spring shut. As the armies closed to spear-fighting distance, the reinforced Greek wings began to curve inward like the horns of a great beast. The Persian center was about to learn the true purpose of Miltiades' unconventional formation, and the plains of Marathon would never be the same. The decisive charge at Marathon. The thunder of 20,000 feet pounding across Marathon's plain drowned out all other sounds. 8,000 Greek hoplites, their bronze armor flashing in the morning sun, bore down on the Persian line like an avalanche of metal. The distance between armies vanished with shocking speed. 200 meters. 100. 50. Persian officers shouted for their archers to loose their arrows, but the Greeks were moving too fast, closing the gap before most bowmen could manage more than a single shot. The impact, when it came, was catastrophic. The Greek phalanx slammed into the Persian line at full sprint, their momentum amplified by 70 pounds of bronze per man. 8,000 spears thrust forward as one. The sound was like 1,000 bronze cauldrons being struck simultaneously, a deafening crash that echoed off the hills behind Marathon. The Persian front ranks, expecting the traditional pushing match of ancient warfare, were literally knocked off their feet by the sheer force of the Greek charge. In the center, exactly as Miltiades had predicted, the Persians' elite troops began pushing back against the intentionally weakened Greek middle. Persian and Saka warriors, sensing victory, surged forward into the seemingly vulnerable gap. The Greek center bent backward but didn't break, each man fighting with the desperate knowledge that everything hinged on holding just long enough. The din was indescribable, bronze striking bronze, the screams of the wounded, the battle cry Eleliou echoing across the plain. Meanwhile, on both flanks, the Greeks' reinforced wings began their deadly work. The tribal units on the right, led by the polemarch Callimachus himself, smashed through the lighter Persian auxiliary troops. On the left, the Plataean contingent fought with the fury of men defending not just their lives, but their very way of life. The Greek wings began to pivot inward like the jaws of a trap, threatening to encircle the entire Persian center. Professional soldiers found themselves being pushed back by men who, just days before, had been potters, farmers, and merchants. The Persian line started to buckle. Their commanders, trained in the warfare of the East, had never encountered anything like this Greek innovation. Their entire tactical doctrine, wearing down enemy formations with arrows, then overwhelming their center with elite troops, had been turned against them. As the Greek wings continued their inexorable advance, the Persian army faced a terrifying choice: retreat to the ships and live, or stay and be encircled. The moment of decision had arrived, and with it, the fate of Western civilization hung in the balance. Wings of victory. Panic erupted in the Persian center as elite warriors realized they were being encircled. Their successful advance into the Greek middle had been a deadly illusion. They'd followed their tactical doctrine straight into Miltiades' trap. The Persian flanks had already crumbled, and now Greek spears threatened them from 3 sides. The orderly Persian formation dissolved into chaos as men began fighting their way back toward the safety of their ships. The retreat quickly turned into a rout. Persian soldiers, encumbered by their wicker shields and loose robes, stumbled through the marsh at the northeastern edge of the plain. The Greeks, despite their exhaustion from the initial charge, pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency. The discipline that made Athens' democracy function in peacetime now revealed its lethal military value. Even in the heat of victory, the Greek units maintained their cohesion, advancing like an unstoppable bronze tide. Datis, watching his army disintegrate, ordered a desperate defensive action to protect the ships. The Persians, Phoenician marines, and surviving archers formed a hasty defensive line on the beach, buying time for their comrades to scramble aboard the triremes. But they faced a terrible choice: wait too long, and they'd be cut down by Greek spears, launched too quickly, and they'd leave thousands of their fellow soldiers stranded on the hostile shore. The sea itself seemed to turn against the Persians. Many ships, hastily launched in panic, foundered in the shallows. Others, overloaded with fleeing soldiers, sat too low in the water to properly work their oars. The Greeks captured 7 ships, their crews and soldiers fighting to the last man rather than face the shame of surrender. The waters of Marathon's Bay turned red as Persian blood mixed with the foam of desperate oarsmen. The final phase of the battle became a race between Persian seamanship and Greek endurance. Despite their exhaustion, the Athenians pushed forward across the corpse-strewn beach, every man knowing that letting too many ships escape would mean facing these same soldiers again tomorrow. As the last Persian vessels pulled away from shore, they left behind a battlefield strewn with 6,400 dead invaders. The Greeks, incredibly, had lost only 192 men, including the brave Polemarch Callimachus. But there was no time to celebrate or mourn. A Greek scout had spotted sails on the horizon, heading south toward an undefended Athens. The surviving Persian force had not given up hope of victory. They were making a bold gambit to seize the city while its defenders were at Marathon. The second battle at Marathon. The Greek army had been fighting since dawn, covered 26 miles in full armor to reach Marathon, and just won the greatest victory in their history. Now they faced an even more daunting challenge. They had to march another 26 miles back to Athens before the Persian fleet could land troops at Phaleron Bay. Without stopping to bury their dead or tend their wounds, the hoplites turned south. The fate of their democracy would be decided by this desperate race against Persian triremes. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as 10,000 men retraced their steps along the coastal road. Their bronze armor, so essential in battle, became an instrument of torture in the late summer heat. Water ran low. Men collapsed from exhaustion, only to be dragged back to their feet by their comrades. Through it all, the image of their wives and children facing Persian revenge drove them forward. They had not defeated an empire just to lose their city through Persian trickery. As the sun began to set, the Persian fleet appeared off the coast of Athens. Datis' plan had been sound: catch the city while its defenders were away, seize hostages, and snatch victory from defeat. Persian marines prepared for landing as their ships rounded the peninsula toward Phaleron Bay. But as they approached the beach, an incredible sight greeted them. The same Greek army they had fled from at Marathon stood in perfect formation along the shore, their spears bristling in the dying light. The psychological impact was devastating. These Greeks, who had already shattered every Persian expectation of warfare, had somehow materialized to face them again. The Persian fleet hung offshore until darkness fell, their commanders debating whether to risk a night landing against such determined defenders. By dawn, they had made their decision. The horizon showed only empty sea. The mighty Persian armada had turned east, beginning its long journey home to explain their failure to King Darius. In Athens, celebration mixed with disbelief as the magnitude of their achievement sank in. 10,000 citizen soldiers had defeated the greatest empire on earth, not once but twice in the same day. More importantly, they had proved that their radical experiment in democracy could survive its greatest test. The Persians had not just faced an army, they had faced free men fighting for their homes, their families, and their right to govern themselves. The Persian clash with Greek democracy would continue, but Marathon had changed everything. For the first time, the empire had been forced to retreat, and the myth of Persian invincibility was shattered forever. Epilogue: Democracy's Dawn. The body of Phidippides, the messenger who had run first to Sparta and then from Marathon with news of victory, became a symbol of Athenian determination. His final word, Nike, victory, would echo through centuries. But the true legacy of Marathon wasn't measured in Persian dead or captured ships. It was measured in the confidence it gave Greek civilization. A line had been drawn in the sand at Marathon's beach. Eastern autocracy had faced Western democracy, and democracy had prevailed. In the decades that followed, Athens underwent a transformation. The victory unleashed an explosion of creativity and confidence that would herald the golden age of Greece. The same citizen soldiers who had fought at Marathon now built the Parthenon, wrote the plays of Aeschylus, himself a Marathon veteran, and developed the philosophical foundations of Western thought. Their military innovations would influence warfare for centuries. Alexander the Great would later study the Battle of Marathon before launching his conquest of Persia. The Romans would adapt Greek phalanx tactics to build their own empire. Even modern military academies study Miltiades' tactical genius at Marathon, particularly his understanding of how morale and momentum could overcome superior numbers. But perhaps Marathon's greatest legacy was the birth of a new kind of society. The battle proved that free citizens fighting for their homeland could defeat professional soldiers fighting for empire. This radical idea that ordinary people could govern themselves and defend their freedoms became the cornerstone of Western democratic thought. 25 centuries later, the modern marathon race still commemorates not just an ancient messenger's run, but the day democracy itself survived its first and greatest test. On that sweltering afternoon in 490 BCE, 10,000 Athenians didn't just save their city, they altered the course of human civilization.